So here's your introduction to the Zen GRF Infinity Learnscape. This is the environment for you to explore and discover your golf swing. And this is the framework structure that we can work within to explore that space. We start with what's in the bag. So looking at all the components that you get in your Zen GRF training system. We then move on to the X, Y, and Z forces explained. So understanding what the system is all about. Why was it created? What's at the heart of the rationale for using it? Then we move on to the safety. Do not attempt the exercises before watching the safety video. And it's there just to help you with the confidence in using it before you start to go freewheeling with the golf club. Then we can start to enter the GRF training system exercises. We're now prepared and ready to go. We start with the pre-swing setup. So you'll see this is involving the grip, the stance, finding that ultimate starting position for you. We can then move on to sensing the XYZ forces. This will start to introduce you to each of the individual components and how you configure those. Having isolated the forces, we can start to amplify our sensors with a focus on using the horizontal force. Once attuned to the horizontal force, we can then explore torque, creating and applying torque, and how do we use that in the swing. These exercises may not feel comfortable. So if something unexpectedly happens while performing the exercise, we can explore troubleshooting torque. Then we can move on to bringing the forces together using flexion and extension. How do we blend these forces using flexion and extension of the body? Moving on to the other side. Transferring momentum in the backswing and downswing. So now creating a full motion, but recognizing how we transfer momentum through that system through using a signature style exercise. Being able to transfer the angular momentum to the club head through the kinematic sequence, from the pelvis through to the torso, through to the arms, through the wrists to the club head. Here we need to learn how to brake to accelerate. From there, we can move on to recognizing release patterns and the low point of your golf swing. So now the specificity of how you're releasing the golf club in relation to the launch angle, the trajectory, and the low point, which is ultimately influencing strike. And finally, we can explore how pressure moves through the footprint using the pressure mapping domes. So ultimately, this is how you navigate yourself around the Zen GRF Infinity Learnscape to find your natural golf swing. So what is in the bag of tricks? What does the GRF Infinity system consist of? So you'll have a balanced pad, a pump for the balance disc, 2 rotating discs. On the underside of the rotating discs, you'll see a circular magnet, and this is to attach it to the board. The GRF Infinity board has grip tape on the top side for friction, steel discs to attach the magnets to. Yours will have a steel disc in the center too, and rubber strips underneath the rails for friction, and that gives us the traction we need to feel how we're using the board in relation with the ground. A little pouch with the center of pressure directional guide and 4 pressure domes, 0.5 and 1 centimetre in depth. And that is the complete system with all the components you'll need for the full training program. So what are the X, Y, and Z forces? Well, we're looking predominantly at the Z force. This is the vertical force, and it's the X and Y components that influence the direction. It's a force vector. So we can see on this drawing here the directional components of the vectors and how they will rotate the centre of mass, which is identified there. That's the black dot. That is what's going to fire the sequence from the pelvis, the torso, to the arms, to the hands, to the club head. But we're really concerned about the Z force, the vertical force, and that's what the GRF Infinity Board provides you. It amplifies your sense to the direction and the magnitude of that vertical force. So you can feel how you are using the vertical force from the trail side together with the lead side to rotate the body in both directions, and not only that, how much of the force you can apply to use in the golf swing. So we have a horizontal component, a rotational component, and a vertical component, i.e. the magnitude of the force. And that's how we're attuning ourselves using this training system. So we can feel how the vertical force from the trail foot working together with the lead foot rotates the body. So we have a sense of the heel to toe, that's the anterior posterior. We have a sense of the mediolateral, that's side to side, that's the horizontal force. And we can sense the force we're applying into the ground, which is the magnitude of the vertical force, through the flexions to extensions. So what the GRF Infinity system provides is the ultimate environment for you to explore these forces, to configure them in the most efficient way to sequence your golf swing in a style that you recognise and can regulate. It's really important before you attempt any of the exercises in the programme to familiarise yourself with the GRF Infinity Board and all its components, so you feel comfortable using the whole training system before you start to challenge the body with the swing exercises. So this is my cabin crew video. It's the safety video. So we're going to open the bag. Now you don't need any help on how to open the bag, but the balance disc needs to be inflated the right amount. So using the right nozzle, pumping up the disc about 2/3. So I would test it so just test it. So that's okay. So I would say just over half to 2/3. So there's movement in all directions and it's fairly stable, okay? If it's too inflated, it will be too unstable and then you might lose your balance very easily. So it's easy to fall off if it's too inflated. So about 60%, and use the smooth side up. So we've got the grip and the friction with the underside. So top side, that's the shiny side, that's the side we're going to use for all the exercises. So now we're going to look at the rotation discs. What I suggest you do first is just familiarise yourself with them, the mobility and the resistance, because we want to make sure we feel comfortable, because that's going to allow us to use them to our maximum potential. So using something for support in close proximity, like a golf bag, and standing shoulder width apart, so you've got a nice comfortable stance. Just twist your feet, maybe use the bag for support. You can use a wall or a chair, anything in close proximity to help you in case you do lose a bit of balance. And then just start to twist without any support and get comfortable. And then we're going to go into extension, flexion, extension. So you're just starting to move up and down and rotate, just explore movement on them. So you're just getting your body used to using them. And so you're not going to start to tighten up or tense up, which can cause loss of balance. We want to be relaxed when we're using these. Now the same applies when we use the board. So when we use the GRF Infinity board, what I suggest you do first is get used to the board without the discs. Again, using something like a golf bag for support. Just to help you get used to the tipping action. And then just twist and get used to shifting your weight and rotating. So just getting used to the dynamics of the movement with the board. Then we can start to introduce the rotation disc, because this is more challenging and we want to feel comfortable with them before we start attempting any exercises. So now we can use the board with the balance disc, and we want to get comfortable using this before we attempt any exercises. Now these have magnets on them which are going to attach to the board, and you've got two settings for these discs. Your board will have a disc in the middle. That's going to be for the pressure dome, not for the rotating disc. So the first thing we do is we place the disc at shoulder width. So we use the outer magnets. Make sure they're secure so there's no slippage. And then step on them carefully. Use a bag in close proximity for support. And now start to tip the board from side to side. If you need to keep hold of the bag or a chair or the wall, that's fine. We want to get used to the movement of the board and the instability of the board with the discs on before we start attempting any exercises. And then start to rotate the discs as you tip the board. Okay, and then explore moving up, moving down, and moving up again. Little movements, which you're going to see in the exercises, but we're just attuning ourselves to these movements so we feel familiar with them and comfortable, and that's going to let us apply ourselves more confidently when we attempt the exercises on the program. So once we've got comfortable without using any support, now we're ready to start using the program of exercises. Okay, so this is the closest we're going to get to looking at the fundamentals of setup, because there aren't any. They just emerge out of intention. But we can move in a certain way which will organise the body in the most optimal way, ready to swing the club to play the golf shot you intend. So to find that posture, the first thing we're going to do is use the rotation discs, because there's going to be a place that you can sense that affords you the most mobility with the hips. So if I bend my knees, for example, that's going to restrict my hip mobility to a degree. Likewise, if I extend fully, that's going to potentially restrict hip mobility. But there's somewhere in between where you'll access that full range. And I just want you to recognize where that is. Is it deep flexion, extended, or slightly flexed? And where is that slight flexion? How does it feel? So we can step off the discs, find that lower body flexion, and just rotate the pelvis and access that range that you were feeling on here. Now you've got resistance from the ground. The feet now have got traction, so it's more ankle and hip mobility that's creating this movement, as opposed to pure hip mobility with no friction. So now it's going to be slightly more restricted, but nevertheless, we should start to feel that comfortable range, and we can start to move into that range, both on the trail side and the lead side. So now, how do we stand in the most balanced state? So we can use the board and the pressure domes, set it shoulder width, using the pressure dome in the center of the foot. That's the tripod, the balls of the feet and the heel, with the pressure dome in the center, in line with the center of the instep. Now stepping on the board, you'll feel the dome in the centre of the foot, and now you can start to recognise where the pressure is in the feet, and you can start to get a heightened sense of the footprint. So we can find that flexion with the lower body, and now we can tip forward with the upper body and find that natural arm hang. So there should be clearance with the arms. Just let the arms hang and swish past each other. And sense the distribution of pressure between the balls of the feet and the heels. The pressure dome is going to elevate that sense. It's going to amplify that sensory feedback. So now you can start to play around. I suggest you tip forward, shift the pressure forward, shift the pressure back. And now move back and forth until you can find that even balance. Let the arms hang from the shoulders. If you stand too upright, there's going to be no clearance. Too far forward, they're going to be a long way from the body. And you're probably going to have to reach for the club. The arms are going to be under tension. Here, with the arm hanging from the shoulder through the gravity line, we've got a natural arm hang without even having to move into a position. We've got balance through the feet, and essentially, we're ready for action. Now we can find the grip. I would suggest you take the club with your lead hand, so my left, and just do some half swings, rocking the board to initiate the swing back and initiate the swing through. And just a few swings, picturing a golf shot, hold the finish, back in front of the body, and just have a look now how your body has orientated the hand relative to the club face and the grip. Now your body did this subconsciously, so it's essentially optimizing itself, and you just need to recognize this by being aware of what your body is actually doing. We're just becoming good observers of the adaptation that's taking place. It's a natural adaptation. So checking where we are in relation to the club head. Cool, that's where I want to go with my left hand. Now I'm going to move into my right. My trail hand, do the same thing. Rock the board first, then swing. Rock the board first, then swing. Just a few times. But always picture the shot. Swing to a finish. Now hold that finish. Don't move the hand, but bring the club back down in front. And where's the right hand? Just recognize where it is in relation to the club face and the grip. Bring the left hand back in to where the body positioned it before. And now we're starting to find our natural grip. The grip is emerging like every other part of your golf swing. These fundamentals optimize themselves when we create the right environment, and when we give the body an opportunity to adapt. It's going to optimize its own function, and we're just going to be aware and recognize what's taking place. So now we've got a pattern that we recognize and can revisit time and time again, and habitualize to. And it's that habitualization that creates the opportunity to just let it go. So we're going to look at the rotational force. So to do this, we're going to use the rotating discs. So I've placed these at approximately shoulder width, an iron. We're going to be using that as well. But before we do that, we're going to isolate that rotational force. We're going to attune ourselves to what it actually feels like to produce that movement, to use that force. So simply rotate, simply twist the body freely, and just let the body rotate with ease. And what we're going to do now is dissociate the body. I want to ask yourself the question, can I distinguish lower body rotation from upper body rotation? So to do that, we're going to hold the club in front of the body just for support, and we're going to simply twist the discs, keeping the upper body stable. So now we're starting to dissociate upper body and lower body and start to develop a feel for that lower body rotation. Now this is hip rotation. But when we step off the board and start to swing the club, we can now start to feel the movement come from the ground, because now we've introduced the ankles and the feet, because the traction of the ground is providing the resistance for us to use to create the torque. So now we're integrating ankles and hips and developing that mobility with the lower body that we can start to utilize in the full swing. Now, when you were doing the exercise, you weren't really just twisting, because that would look like this. Okay, and you can see this is quite different to what we were doing before. Okay, because I wasn't moving from side to side, because I wasn't maintaining flexion. I wasn't staying in flexion here. We were actually extending the hips. So we need to use this in the golf swing. We need to use hip extension and flexion, and that allows us to use rotation. So we're going to move on a step further now and introduce the flexion and extension. So we're going to start as a right-handed golfer, rotating to the right in extension. So what is extension? Well, it's extension of the ankles, the knees and the hips. We're not in flexion, we've extended, so we're standing up if you like. And then we're going to drop into flexion and then extend to rotate. And then we're going to drop into flexion and extend to rotate. So we're using extension for rotation. We're not using flexion. If I go into flexion and stay in flexion or go further into flexion, you can see what this might lead to in a golf swing, what kind of movement patterns might emerge from that use of these forces. But if I start to extend to allow me to rotate, it looks very different. And this is going to help me transfer the forces through the system to the club. So we've got to integrate the flexion and the extension at the right time. And that allows us to accelerate the rotation and also decelerate. If we're throwing a ball, we don't continue to rotate. The lower body brakes very quickly. We rotate and the lower body decelerates very quickly and brakes to allow the hips to accelerate, which then brake, which allows the upper body to accelerate, and this brakes, allowing the arm and the wrist to deliver the speed to the club. This is what many might know as kinematic sequence, but it's really just a primitive movement. We've been doing this for hundreds of thousands of years. These forces are inherent in our evolution of movement. These forces are used in all primitive actions: kicking, throwing, hitting. We're combining the horizontal, the rotation and the vertical forces to deliver power to whatever we're throwing or hitting or kicking. So we're already attuning ourselves to these forces that we already possess. So we're going to go back onto the rotation discs and we're going to look at the flexions and extensions. Because when we were doing the dissociation exercise earlier, we were actually extending the hips and the knees and the ankles to a degree and flexing them too. We weren't just staying in flexion and rotating, or that would look like this. We were, to a degree, extending towards neutral, and we may even get to neutral with certain segments of the body, certain joint interactions, but we're moving towards neutral. So we're starting in a more extended position, moving into flexion, and then extending again to get the rotation. So we're using this extension to accelerate that rotation and help us transfer that force through the body. It's also enabling us to stop, to brake, because as per the kinematic sequence, we need to be able to stop to then enable the next segment to fire. The next segment brakes, it stops, and then the next segment fires, and it continues through the system to the end of the chain that results in the swish. And that's the release that we identify with. But what we're doing here is we are starting to recognize all the individual components, develop an attunement to these, so we can time them and create that effortless swish. So we start in extension with the ankles, the knees, the hips, more so the knees and the hips. The ankles aren't, they're more in a neutral position. We're going to move into flexion, so we're not rotating yet. We're moving into flexion, and we're going to extend to rotate the discs. We're not going to use flexion to rotate. That's going to slow the whole system down. We're not going to be able to transfer the force to the end of the chain, and it may affect the direction of your golf swing. You can imagine if we're staying in flexion and trying to use that rotation whilst in flexion, it's probably going to influence the direction you release the club. It's probably not going to allow a free release of the club in the direction that you intend. So back onto the discs. Extension, flexion, extension. Just getting used to this movement and using this extension to accelerate the rotation discs. When we introduce the club, we can now identify when this isolated component, i.e. rotational force, integrates complicitly with the kinematic sequence. How we use this to drive that golf club and develop the speed. So we can start to feel the braking. This is really important. If you find in this a little bit tricky with two hands, we go to one hand and we can start with just pure rotation. Because although I'm just thinking of rotation, I'm actually extending and flexing. We're not staying in flexion. If I do stay in flexion, I'm probably going to have to use my arm more. And this is going to introduce unnecessary tension that I'm probably not aware of, because this is how I normally swing the club. But once I experience extension, suddenly I can release the club much more freely. It reduces the tension. Suddenly, the club swishes without my effort. So the extension is key. If you're feeling a lot of tension in the swing, you're probably not utilising the flexions and the extensions. So this exercise is really important for you. Once we feel comfortable with the exercise, using the club in one hand, we can reintroduce the other hand now and start to time the flexion and the extension. And we can start to play around with the speed and the braking force. So almost now feeling like we're pushing and lifting off the ground, and we're starting to really now attune ourselves to the vertical element. This is the vertical force that we're using to apply that rotational force. So this is at the heart of the timing. So when do we apply that vertical force? To accelerate those rotations and create that effortless impact snap. So now we can use an exercise without the club to develop our awareness even further of the sequence whereby the lower body transfers the speed to the upper body, which transfers the speed to the hands. So we can use the rotation discs and we can start to isolate that lower body rotation. Now we've not got the club for support, so now you're having to use your proprioceptive map. You're having to use that body awareness. Can you recognise where the upper body is in relation to the lower body, i.e. the opposing motion, the upper body is resisting the rotation of the lower body. Can you feel how the lower body is moving and the upper body is maintaining stability? Okay, and then we're going to introduce the upper body with it, and we're going to let the arms swing too. And then we're going to speed up. We're going to speed up not by staying in flexion and just rotating. We're going to start to use our awareness of extension and flexion and extension to release those arms, i.e. the golf club. So we're transferring, in biomechanical terms, angular momentum, which is resulting in this increase in angular velocity with the club head. So extending to rotate, and that swishes the arms. And we want to be patient. We want to let the arms swing. We're not trying to control the arms. And this is now developing a level of awareness for tension. We're attuning ourselves to the tension levels, which is really important. Are we allowing this force to transfer through the body with relative ease? This takes time. So there's a timing component to this that we're developing a high attunement for. takes time for the arms to swing. And let the arms slap against the body, against the stomach and the back. So you're letting your elbows flex and extend freely. You're not trying to control them. There's no rigidity to the arms and the shoulders. There's no tension in the neck. You're letting the arms swing freely and react to the forces that you're creating from the rotation discs. And this essentially creates that sequence. When we reintroduce the club now, do we experience that same flow through the system? And what we're starting to do now is starting to develop an awareness for the club head, because we're developing this natural momentum with the swing weight. And this is now elevating your level of awareness for the timing of the swing and ultimately how you create that effortless speed. So now we're going to isolate the horizontal force, the lateral motion, and we're going to step onto the board and simply rock it from side to side and just experiencing this shift of weight. And that's really your centre of mass that's moving. And what's shifting that centre of mass is the lower body movement. And that essentially is the pressure that we're applying to this board. Now, when we bring the club into the system, we can just use one hand just to sense the weight of the club. It makes it so much easier now to attune ourselves to this momentum. Momentum of the board rocking and momentum of the club head swinging. So I'm using my right hand as a right-handed golfer just to feel this natural swinging action. And then we can start to speed the action up, but we speed it up from the ground. So we rock the board a little bit quicker, back and forth, and that creates the momentum. And what we should be experiencing is the banging of the board before the reaction of the club. So we feel the momentum of the board, and then we feel the momentum of the club. We feel the swing after the movement of the board. So now we're attuning ourselves to the rocking of the board, which is the pressure shift we're creating. And we can speed this shift up. We can start to shift earlier. And this is essentially how we are creating this stretch reflex action, like throwing the ball. It's the primitive action that's utilising these forces and recruiting that stretch shorten cycle. That's the elasticity of the muscles, which creates this active recoil. Essentially, that's the effortless feeling you're getting in the swing, in the downswing. So we're using the shifting of the pressure. We can feel the banging of the board. We can hear the banging of the board. And we want to experience that before the club recoils. Because it's this movement that's generating this reaction. And this creates that effortless release. So we actually want to experience the board banging this way before the club reaches the end of the backswing, because it's the banging of the board in this direction that changes the direction of the golf club. And it does that by creating the stretch. So we want to be using this effortless power by timing the pressure shift. And the board is giving us that feedback. This feedback loop is so important. It's not just the feel of the bang, it's the sound. What's the intensity of the bang? Can you create that loud bang way before you feel the club react? Essentially, we're leaving the golf club behind us and letting it react to these forces that we're creating. Now, our attention at the moment is purely on horizontal force and the timing of that shift. And we're going to feel how the club reacts when we're gripping it with the left hand. So now we bang the board to swing the club back. So I would always start with the club to the left before I bang to the right, so I can feel how the board creates the forces for the club to react to. I can feel those forces that I'm generating, which the club is going to react to, and then I can sense the momentum, which takes it to the top. So essentially, the club is swinging freely, and then I can feel the opposite force, which recoils the golf club in the direction we want to swing to play the golf shot. Now, when I'm doing it with the left hand, I'm allowing the left arm to move across the rib cage. This is adduction. The left arm's moving across. We're letting the golf club swing freely. If this golf club is being positioned in space, I'm probably not letting this left arm move across the rib cage. So you might feel kind of some compression against the rib cage. That's fine. You've got to go with that motion, but use the board to create that motion. And then use the board to release the golf club. And to do that, we need to let the arm swing off the rib cage. And this is abduction. This is the left arm swinging freely off the chest. And this is enabling us to swing the club with freedom and let that impact snap happen under the momentum of the club head. Now, you might feel during that change of direction, you might feel the arm move more across the chest. You might feel this compression increase. That's fine. The arm is going to adduct further across the chest, and this is actually creating more stretch that you can utilize with the active recoil. So by leaving the club behind, you can actually be increasing this stretch recoil, which is even more effortless power. It's how you use the board. It's the timing of the pressure shift, and you're recognizing this from the sound of the board and the feeling of the bang of the board against the floor. So now we're going to use both hands, and we're going to step onto the board, and we're going to start to feel how that lateral motion, using that horizontal force, is creating that momentum with the club. And ideally, we want to feel the same level of ease that we experienced with one arm, with the left, and then with the right. We want to feel that same level of ease with both hands on the club. And we can speed the action up, and we can slow it down. Now, what I suggest we do is start in the finish. So the weight's on the left side, the board's tilted, and then we're going to swing the club back and through to that same finish. We're now starting to recognise where this action takes us. We're developing recognition for this pattern. This is really important because it's this pattern recognition that is going to transfer into any environment. This is how we take it to the golf course. Recognising the movements we're making, the nervous system recognises these. It's going to allow us to access these patterns when we need them on the course subconsciously. We know where we're swinging to, and we know where we're moving to return back to that place. So recognising the finish is important. So starting in the finish, using the board to swing back, and the board to swing through, to return to that finish position. And starting to develop that real awareness of where you are in space, how you're now looking at the target. Where did these forces take you to in that finished position? Because this is what we need to experience. Because this is going to be the deeply embedded form of movement we're creating that we're going to recognise on the golf course. And that is commitment, that is confidence on the course. So we can take this stage further now, and we can start to tap into those primitive, instinctive forces to initiate the swing. Just like throwing, just like hitting or kicking, there's a movement towards the target which then creates an active recoil backwards, away from the target. And it's this shift of pressure which creates the conditions to generate the movement we need to tap in to this stretch recoil and this effortless release in the direction of the target. So we can start now with our weight on the right leg for a right-handed player, so trail leg. We're going to make an initial movement to the target by banging the board towards the target. And now we've got the pressure moving towards the target, so you'll see the pressure trace on the pressure plate data moving to the target and then moving away. This is noticeable in every efficient action. There's a shift of pressure to the target and then a movement away. This can be so subtle, but what we want to do is heighten our attunement to this. So we need to exaggerate those forces so we can utilize it in our movement subconsciously. So we're going to start on the right foot and we're going to make a movement towards the target and then a movement back and then through to the finish. So now we've got the pressure initiating the whole action. We're moving to the target, away from the target and back towards the target. And the club is always reacting at the end. You'll notice a lot of players on television, on the tours, they do have a forward press of some sort. Sometimes it's very noticeable, sometimes not so. But pressure data shows us that all efficient swings have an initiation towards the target and then away from the target. It's a question we ask ourselves, how do we start the swing? I get asked that so many times. And now we've got a tool to do it. So I'd suggest using a ball, starting on the right foot, rock to the left, rock to the right, and rock to the left. While you're doing this, your attention should be solely on the board. The timing of that banging sensation, the audible feedback, the kinesthetic feedback, the temporal element. So when do you feel it happen and when does the club react? So practice that, starting on the right, moving to the left and moving back. And that's for the right-handers, it's opposite to the left. We're going to look at the exercises now that are going to help us create the torque in the right direction and at the right time. So if we've been having problems with the twisting of the board, then this is going to be ideal to train ourselves how to sense the movement we need to rock the board without the twist and to time that torque at the right time so we can get that effortless release of the club. So we're going to use the footboard in the heel to toe direction, and we're going to use the center of pressure directional guide on the board and the balance pad for the left foot. So for the right hander, we're using the board on the right foot and the balance pad for the left. So we're focusing now on the movement of the right foot. How are we creating that force and transferring it through the body, through the rotations and the vertical force? Be careful when stepping on the board. Make sure that the foot is central on the board and that the stance is comfortable, probably about shoulder width. So we don't need a club. What we're going to do is focus on the movement to bang the board. Now, we've got 3 lines on the directional guide. We've got a yellow line, which is pointing to the left. We've got a red line, which is pointing straight ahead. That's the midline of the foot. And we've got a silver line pointing to the right. We want the red line to travel directly between the first and second toe. So position your foot accordingly in the center of the board. Just test it to make sure you can rock the board easily forward and back. And you can already start to see how my body's rotating. As we know, it's very similar to the gait cycle. And what we're experiencing now is how the left foot reacts. So how does the left foot react to allow the right foot to create this motion? So we're shifting our attention firstly to the right foot. And I just want you to rock the board back and forth and just notice as you rock the board forward, what direction do you notice your pressure travel? In order to rock the board, to bang the board forward, does your pressure move towards the yellow line? Does it move straight ahead towards the red or out towards the silver? Or does the board not really bang at all? Do you find it difficult to bang the board? If so, then your pressure might be moving too much to the left, even further left of the yellow line. So this medial direction of your center of pressure is making it difficult to bang the board. What we need to do is make sure the pressure moves through the red line. And this is going to allow us to rotate away from the right side, into the left side. So contrary to many beliefs in the golf swing, that the pressure should move and continue to move this way, it actually starts to move towards the target, but then very quickly shoots off up the red line, through the midline, and that's the propulsion mechanics that we're creating to bang the board. So we need the pressure to move through the red. You can exaggerate this feel and shift the pressure towards the silver line. That's going to help you exaggerate the feel and start to experience this external rotation, this opening up, if you like, of the right hip. This is allowing us to use our vertical force, which we know is going to help rotate the body and transfer that angular momentum through the body to the club. If we're moving this way and the pressure's moving too much to the left, this makes it very difficult to recruit that propulsion chain. And now we've got to start to use the upper body. We've got to go to the upper body for the torque. And that's when we start to experience changes in swing path and release of the club. And we get a lot of variability because we're starting to rely on the rotations further up the chain, which is happening extremely fast. And this can create a lot of variability in the release pattern and the outcome. So this is right at the heart of your swing. This is the start of the chain that's going to help develop that consistency in the release of the club. So shifting the pressure forward through the red line and then exaggerate the feel, bang the board and let the left foot react. You're probably going to experience a pronation. This is a natural collapse of the left leg. The knee collapses. This allows the pelvis to rotate. This allows us to bang the board towards the heel. And then we're going to shift the pressure forward. So it comes from the heel, through the toe, through the red line. And that's going to bang the board. And in doing so, create the forces that we need to rotate, shift our weight, and transfer that momentum through the body. So we've got momentum moving to the target and through the body, but we're using the propulsion chain. We're not thinking of shifting to the target. We're not thinking of moving up. It happens from the right foot. So this banging of the board that you're experiencing is tapping into that chain. But we need to use our sense of awareness. We need to heighten that sense of awareness. So by using these visual aids, that's going to help you create a frame of reference. So in essence, a new movement map emerges and a recognition of those patterns within that map. So banging the board, allowing the hips to rotate, even allow the arms to swing. And where's this momentum coming from to swing the arms? So it's coming from that banging of the board, that rotation of the body, and swings the arms effortlessly to deliver that speed to the club. So we're going to introduce the club now and make some easy half swings. We need to make repetitive swings back and forth to start to recognise how the body's reacting. This needs to be dynamic. This cannot be chunked. We're not trying to slow this thing down with our conscious mind and position it. We need to recognise it in the motion. So it's in swing recognition. And it's the banging of the board that creates these forces that we're transferring through the body, which delivers the club to the board. So these forces happen before we sense this delivery, before we sense the release. Therefore, we leave the club behind. This has got to react to these pivot forces. If we're using the upper body first, we've now disengaged the pivot. So now the lower body is just reacting to the forces we're creating with the upper body. So bang the board and let the club swing in the air freely. And notice where the left foot goes. It starts to roll to the left. This left leg is externally rotated, and therefore it's allowing you to extend. That's going to allow us to tap into the vertical forces. And that's going to allow us to transfer the force through the body to the club. So this all happens very early. And just recognising where this takes your arms. Where do you finish when you make this motion? Where are your arms in relation to you? Where's the club? Hold this position for a second, recognise that finish. We need an awareness of where this movement takes us. And then we can swing back and through to that same place. But we bang the board to swing back. The bang happens first, then the swing, and then we feel the finish. An alternative exercise we can use to sense how the left side reacts is to replace the balance pad with a rotation disc. So we take the pad away, bring the rotation disc in, same stance width, make sure it's aligned centrally with the board. Now the rotation disc is going to allow the foot to rotate freely, but it's really the hip action that's making this motion. But when we return to the ground, the traction of the ground is now going to create resistance, so we introduce the ankle mobility and the hip mobility into the sequence. Now to create that force, we're going to use the rocking of the board, heel to toe, and let the left leg react. So now we're starting to sense this external rotation, which is allowing us to extend easier and transfer that rotational force through the body to the golf club. Play around with the banging of the board and the sense of direction of that centre of pressure through the foot. What's it like to move the pressure to the left? Is it as easy to rotate this disc? What's it like when you move the pressure through the midline, through the red line, and through the silver line to the right? So you're starting to experience now where your optimal trace lies to get that rotation to the left. Now to tap into these propulsion mechanics, we kind of know it's close to the red line. You may need to exaggerate this somewhat and go to the silver line with that pressure to get the rotation of the disc. And with that rotation, the extension. And we know this rotation and extension is going to transfer that vertical force through the system and allow us to deliver that speed to the club. So sensing where the pressure's moving, in what direction, to bang the board, to rotate the pelvis, and deliver that speed to the club. So we've got to ensure that the pressure moves forward. If the pressure moves too far to the left, we get internal rotation of the hips. That's going to stall the rotation of the hips. We're going to have to go to the upper body. We're going to find it difficult to bang the board. We're going to find it difficult to rotate the discs. We're not going to get a lot of action from the board and the rotating disc. But if we start to move the pressure in this direction, we get the external rotation, we can get the pelvis rotating, we can get the bang a lot easier, we get the rotation and the extension of the left side a lot easier, and now we can start to transfer the forces and get an easier release of the club. That's a really important aspect to focus on, is how do you sense the hips? I would move through your body map. I would do a very quick internal scan of the body. How do the feet feel? How do the hips feel? How does the upper body feel? And then the arms and the hands and the club. So start with the feet, make a few swings, recognise the feet, even the knees, the flexions and the extensions. Notice the banging of the board extends the left side. We're not staying in flexion. Otherwise I've got to now go to the upper body, and now I've lost my kinematic sequence. We need the extension, we need the pelvis to lift, and that's going to allow us to transfer that force through the body with the rotation. And get a sense of timing. This action is preceding the delivery of the golf club. This happens before the release. This happens before you sense that impact snap, that swish of the club. So allow that left side to extend, and then when you step off the board and the disc, back onto the ground, and then you're going to experience what the ground offers you in terms of resistance or traction for the body to move against, to recruit these forces and transfer them to the club. If you're experiencing difficulty in rotating or banging the board, then we may not be letting the heel lift. So when you bang the board, if you need to let the right heel lift, let it do so. Remember, we're moving with ease of motion, freedom of movement. We're not trying to resist or hold anything. We need to let movement happen. So in order to bang the board, if the right heel has to lift, no problem. It's the bang that's important, and it's the direction of pressure that's important, and it's the twisting of the disc that's important, and the extension of the left leg that's important. This is what this movement's all about. To get those forces transferring to the club, and it is a different feeling. It is a new movement map that is emerging. So embrace that uncomfortable feeling, because the body's starting to reorganize. It's starting to recognize this. The nervous system has to adapt. So you have to give it time. You have to play around with this feeling. You have to exaggerate it somewhat and shift your attention into a place that is of use. Noticing how the body's moving so you can recognize these patterns. And then when you're on the course or the practice ground, these are moves that you know, you're confident, you're going to commit to because you've done them so many times and you've played around with the feel of it, the variability of it. So you're attuning yourself to your most optimal movement pattern to create this efficient transfer of force through the body. So now we're going to have a look at how we create the torque and the timing of the torque. So now we're going to use the board without the discs. And the unique design of the GRF Infinity board with the rails is going to amplify the sensitivity of the torque we're creating. So now we can really start to get a feel for when we're applying that torque, and then with the feedback loop and our understanding of the torque, we're going to know whether it's helping us or whether it might be affecting the direction we're swinging and the power we're generating. So we're going to place it on the floor. Take a club, step on the board. Always take care when you're stepping on the board, shoulder width apart. So normal golf stance. But now we're going to start to speed the swing up. So we're going to start to get an idea of how the board is reacting under forces that we'd normally generate with a swing. So we're going to start to speed up the swing. We've been working at relatively low level speeds. Now we're going to speed it up, and therefore we're going to start to sense the reaction with the body and the swing. So we're going to hit a couple of shots. And what we've noticed here is the board's twisted. So where this torque comes from is really important. If we initiate with the upper body first, we get a reaction with the lower body in the counter direction, and that twists the board. That immediately tells us that we're sequencing in the wrong order. We're sequencing with the torso first, and then the pelvis and the lower body are reacting to maintain balance and stability, because we're swinging a golf club and we've got to counterbalance that weight. We've got to maintain stability. So this is telling us we need to reorder the sequence. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at how we can create the right torque in the right direction and at the right time. If you're experiencing a twisting of the board, which as we know is that counter torque, which is a resistant force against the forces we want to create that effortless motion, then we know we're starting the sequence from the torso instead of the lower body. And this is going to affect the hand path. It's going to affect the direction of the golf swing, if you like, the geometry of the golf swing. So if this represents the hand path, a natural rocking of the board will help facilitate this desired hand path around the body. It's a natural arc. But if we start to sequence from the top, from the torso down, we're going to get a reactive force. We're going to get that counter torque with the board. It's going to twist, and that is how we recognise this initiation with the upper body. We need to rewire that order. So instead of starting with the upper body and creating that twist, now the board's pointing over here because I've initiated the upper body and I've created that counter rotation. What we're going to do now is start with the lower body. We're going to feel the bang of the board first. Now we've got the upper body reacting to the lower body. So we're starting to shift momentum in the direction we want to go, which is influencing the direction of the swing. And that's going to make it much easier to create the desired swing path for the shot shape we intend. So the board is really providing us with feedback that we would experience on a pressure plate. So we're getting a kinesthetic feedback loop. So we're starting to feel those torques that we would see on the pressure plate screen. So essentially this is your pressure plate. This is providing you that feedback loop that you can react to. So in essence, we're using the three forces to create this linear movement which is the momentum and the direction of the target. We've isolated horizontal forces, rotational forces, and experienced the vertical forces. The vertical force that's helped create those rotational forces. Now we're going to combine all three. We're going to integrate them and start to time the use of them to create optimal efficiency with the swing. And we've got an intuitive sense for this. We know when it feels right, when the timing's feeling great, or when it's feeling a little bit off. We've got that innate sense. This is a primitive action, so we can sense this purely through this kinesthetic feedback loop. And so what we're doing now is we're bringing the rotation discs in, and we're going to place them on the board. So we're going to start with I'm going to use the wider stance. So they're in position. Make sure that they are in position. So there's going to be no slippage. So the magnets are in place. And then we're going to step on. And now we can combine the rotation with the horizontal and that extension, which is applying that vertical force to help us transfer all these forces through the system, which in turn swings the club freely. So we can start to shift from side to side, feel that horizontal force. We can start to rotate the discs. And then we can start to extend, flex and extend. And it's this flexion and extension that I really want you to shift your attention to, because it's this extension that is essentially banging the board. Of course, the board is in the air at this point and we're extending to push it down. When we're on the ground is providing the platform for us to extend up from. So by pushing down, essentially we're pushing up. And this is the vertical force transferring through the system. So with the club in your hand, we can swing back, extend, move into flexion, and now this is the magic move. We use the extension to rotate, to bang the board. This essentially is at the heart of your timing. This is what timing's about. It's not one force in isolation. This is a combination of all three. And what we've done is we've broken them down into their component form and allowed the body to reorganize them through its sense of feel. So now, how do we move to create the loudest bang? From this flexed position, we're going to have to shift and extend. And how can we get that rotation through the disc? We've got to be able to rotate the hips. So we're rotating the hips by using that extension. Now, the timing of this is vital. And if you feel it's difficult to achieve that banging sensation with the board, maybe we're not shifting our body across. Maybe we're not moving our mass. We have to push. We have to use that horizontal force to allow ourselves to move into a place where the joints are more optimally aligned to allow that extension to take place. So with the club in the hand, we extend, flex. Now, the tendency might be, as you go into flexion, to rotate. And what that's going to do is potentially make it more difficult to bang the board, because when we're in flexion and we rotate, we've missed out on the horizontal force. We need the horizontal force to be able to time the vertical with that rotation. Now you'll notice when we go vertical, the feet don't twist anymore. The feet stop. That's the braking. That's the deceleration. That's essential. That braking force is required to transfer the forces through the system to the club. If we keep rotating those discs, we're going to slow the whole system down. We create this block movement, and now we're also influencing the direction of the swing, which we'll talk about at a later stage. So allow the club to swing freely and react to these, what some might call, are pivot forces. And we're optimizing them with the use of the rotation discs on the footboard. So now it's the moment of truth. It's when we go back to the ground. And now we're going to experience the use of these forces with our traction with the ground. So how the body's interacting with the ground to create these forces and transfer them through to the club. And our attention can shift onto our use of each of these individual forces at any one time, so we can start to get a sense of how we're using that. And then we can start to play around with it. This is the element of self-discovery. This is how we start to identify our signature style. What is our blueprint? How do we use these primitive forces in our own unique, primitive, instinctive style? So now we're going to make some swings back and forth so we can feel the horizontal force. We can feel how we're using those extensions and rotations and allowing the club to swing. So we're allowing the rib cage to rotate and transfer this force through to the shoulders and the arms with freedom. We're not restricting, we're not keeping our eyes in a certain place, restricting any motion. We're allowing degrees of freedom to emerge. We're essentially using the movement potential we possess to its optimal capacity. We're not improving any movement ranges, we're just maximising what we already possess. This is how we can access the swing we know we have, but we've never been able to feel it or find it because these forces haven't been used in the right way because we've been restricting them. So now we can start to feel that movement from side to side. We can feel that movement up and down, and we can feel that freedom in the rotation on the way back and through. So holding that finish, recognising that finish, and swinging back and through to that finish. And getting a sense of where that snap is. Where is that snap? Is it before the ball, after the ball? Ideally, let's make it as late as possible. And notice where that release pattern takes you to in your finish. This is the recognisable finish position that is essential for all this to happen. So we can reverse engineer this process, start with the finish, and now feel the whole motion back and through to that finish. While you're doing this, you can shift your attention onto the weight shift. How does the horizontal force feel? How does the rotation feel? And how does the vertical force feel? When do you feel that extension, that push? Always returning to that finish position. And when you set up now and play the shot, you can start to recognise this movement and these forces that you're creating and let the club swing effortlessly and freely to the end position. An additional exercise and a signature exercise for isolating awareness for how we initiate the backswing and the through swing, and develop recognition for how the hips rotate externally can be used with the other rotating disc. So we have a rotating disc on the left. We move the board to the centre. And we place the other disc to the right hand side. Now we can start to isolate the movement patterns needed to create a free-flowing backswing and a free-flowing follow-through. Once we've got the board and the discs in position, we take our club, take our stance with the left foot on the board and right foot on the rotating disc, and now we're going to start to develop awareness for how we initiate the backswing and how the hip rotates and how the sequence initiates from the ground, how the hips rotate the pelvis, and this creates the forces to create a natural momentum and a free-flowing backswing using the weight of the club head. So making sure the left foot's central on the board, starting on the heel with the left foot, we can then rock the board forward and rotate the disc with the right foot clockwise. And this motion is triggering the sequence to transfer that momentum through the body to swing the club effortlessly behind us. And we're only focusing on the backswing. We're not making a follow through here because that would be an inefficient use of the right leg. The right leg externally rotates from the hip, but it does that from the force that we're creating from the left side by pushing forward on the board. And we can use the directional guide, we can use those lines, the yellow, the red and the silver, to develop awareness for how we're pushing. So for this movement in the swing, I would suggest we start to focus on shifting the pressure towards the silver line. That's to the right of the midline. So that's going to cause a natural collapse of the left side. That's going to help rotate the pelvis, and that's going to create the force to rotate the right hip externally. So essentially, we've got the body rotating clockwise. And now we've got a sequence we can use to transfer that momentum to the club. And the more force we create, the more momentum we can create with the club. Essentially throwing the club back. To attune our awareness more acutely, we can then step off the board and make a swing, and now we can feel how the body's reacting with the friction that the ground provides. Now we can really start to feel how our body's interacting with the ground to create the forces to generate that movement pattern and sequence the backswing. So now step onto the board with the right foot, making sure it's in a central position. Step onto the rotating disc with the left foot, making sure the feet are central. And now we can start to bang the board forward and let the left leg rotate. So the disc will rotate anti-clockwise. This movement happens first and the club reacts. So the snap that we sense with the club head always happens much later than the movement we're creating with the lower body. So the banging of the board, the rotating of the disc, always happen much sooner than the release of the golf club, which is the timing of that release. So now we've got the force of the board, the left leg's externally rotating. Essentially, we're opening the body up. This might be a movement that you see quite often. Natural biomechanics. It's natural ground reaction forces which are being transferred through efficient movement patterns through to the club. And this is heightening our attunement by amplifying that sensitivity to the right foot and the left foot, the right hip and the left hip, and the swinging of the club head. So we just make a few free-flowing swings. So for this exercise, we can allow ourselves to include the backswing with this through swing. We're not just isolating follow through. We are including the backswing too. When we go back to the ground, when we step back off the board and now start to make some swings, we can really sense how the right hip and the left hip are rotating to allow this kinematic sequence to occur from the pelvis through to the club. But it all starts from the ground. It starts from the ankles. So it's very important the feet are moving correctly, because the feet are moving the ankles are moving the hips, the knees are just moving with the ankles and hips. So it's starting from the ground, transferring through the hips to the pelvis, and the upper body is transferring that force through the torso, through the arms, to the club, and now we can sense a free swinging of the club head. And this essentially is optimizing and regulating our tension levels. So we don't have to think about tension, because we're now transferring forces efficiently through the body, and the hands just react to those forces to swing the club head. Tension's something that is just a subsidiary. It's a function of these forces. So our attention can be on the golf shot, our awareness can be on our body movement, and we can let that swing just react to the golf shot. So I hope you enjoy exploring all these drills and discovering your true identity, because we're recruiting now functional forces that the body can use and the swing can react to in response to the golf shot. Essentially, this is an organic organisation that you can regulate. So it's true signature style movement that's starting to emerge subconsciously in response to that conscious intention. This is how we play other sports, and this is how you're going to reveal your true signature style swing. Have fun learning. It's a big playground. If your swing's feeling a lot of effort, maybe you're swinging as if you were sat on a swivel chair. Now, the swivel chair basically is reducing the friction. My feet are off the ground, I can't interact with the ground, so this is a golf swing with very, very little ground reaction force. And this is potentially how you're swinging. We can use our understanding of our foot-ground interaction to help us. So to put this into real terms, if we were to go back to the swivel chair, so if I want to rotate the swivel chair to the right, i.e. clockwise direction as a right-hander for the backswing, I'm going to apply force with the golf club in this direction and it rotates me to the right. Now I've got to also control that rotation. So I'm going to have a force that's going to provide some resistance. So I'm rotating, but then I've got a force that's also helping me control that rotation. If both forces are opposing, I'm going to get a lot of acceleration. So what I've got here is some force that's allowing me to control the rotation. Now this quickly changes direction. So instead of it being a braking force with a more vertical component, this changes direction, and now I can rotate the target. So this is going to slow me down, and that's going to accelerate me. Now, this change in direction is actually lower body movement. And we need that to rotate and accelerate the center of mass, essentially, which is this swiveling of the chair. That's my center of mass. Its movement is influenced by the force I'm applying with these golf clubs, i.e. the force vectors, to move. So we can experience this in our golf swing. So we can use these forces to rotate and control that rotation, and then we can use the forces to accelerate towards the target. But we need to brake quickly. Every fast car needs big brakes. If you've got a Ferrari and you've got Fiesta brakes, you can only drive it like a Fiesta now because you can't use that horsepower because you're going to lose control. So if you could have them, you could be using a lot of power, but if you can't apply that braking force, then you can't apply the speed to the end of the chain. So essentially, it's a whiplash effect where the end of the chain has passed, but the center of mass has stopped abruptly. So when we're rotating, we stop and the end of the chain goes. If this keeps rotating, everything moves together. Essentially, we slow the end of the chain down. So by putting more effort in the wrong way, we can actually be slowing the swing down. So the swing can feel powerful, but the end product isn't what you expect. So it's all about using the forces in the right way, applying them at the right time, and then you're going to start to sense that level of ease in your motion because the forces that you're creating are more effective, you're transferring them more efficiently, the whole pattern starts to become a lot more natural. So when we're talking about the directional component of this vertical force, it's really important that we recognise how we're applying it. For example, you might see people use sliders, and we use furniture sliders sometimes to highlight shear force, but it's really just showing how the body reacts if there was no friction. And that's not realistic because there is friction. It's okay for showing the direction that would occur if there was no friction, but with the friction of the ground, we're going to move very differently. We actually use these to highlight the origin of the movement pattern if there was no friction, if you couldn't use the lower body. But we can use the lower body. If we're going to use the lower body, there is this horizontal component, but that's not a movement pattern that's going to occur in the golf swing, in the downswing. We're going to be rotating counterclockwise. So it's not just the horizontal component that's allowing us to create the rotation, it's the vertical component too, and it's the direction of that vertical component. So we need to be applying pressure with extension, not just a horizontal force which throws us into hyperextension. So using these is okay to get a sense of that shear force, but it's really the configuration of all three components that we should be sensing, not just one, it's all three. So when we train, we want to be training in a way where we're attuning ourselves to all three forces. And that's what the GRF Infinity board provides. How do we optimize these braking forces? Well, what we're going to do, we're going to use the two discs first, just in isolation, no board. Shoulder width apart. Take a stance, as if the ball was there. We're not going to use a ball. And now we're going to twist and extend as normal. Then we're going to flex, and we're going to use the extension to rotate, but we're not going to continue rotating. We're going to use that extension to brake. So now we're working the vertical forces in a direction which is providing a braking force. And now we've got the braking forces working for us. The pelvis is decelerating, which is enabling the torso to accelerate and the hands to accelerate and transfer that speed to the club head. So feeling the braking force is really important. Once we've got that feel of the extension and the braking, thinking of a clock face, notice how the left foot's kind of stopping at 12 or 11 o'clock. It's not continuing. We've actually used the vertical force to brake the pelvic motion so the upper body can continue. So we can take it a step further and we can remove the rotating disc and use the balance disc and the GRF board. So I've placed the balance disc underneath the trail foot, my right foot, and the GRF board in the heel toe direction underneath the lead foot. We've now got a setup which is allowing us to sense the pressure shift through the left foot to extend the left leg, create that rotation, but also the braking force. We've now got the direction of that vertical component working in order to brake the pelvic rotation. So now the upper body can accelerate. With the right foot, we can feel how it's working to enable the left side to bang the board. So we've got the forces working from the right side in conjunction with the left side to brake that pelvic action and enable the upper body to deliver that speed to the club. So we can make some half swings and feel this action before we would be hitting impact. So we're starting to feel the braking forces before delivery. And that's important. As we saw on the image earlier, we need those braking forces working against the rotation of the upper body. And that's going to enable us to create a more efficient sequence. Pelvis braking, upper body accelerating, hands transferring the speed to the club head, and that's the sequence we're looking for maximum efficiency and an effortless release. The intention of the shot is at the heart of the golf swing. Everything organises around the shot. So recognising the release pattern and the timing of that release is critical to allowing a free-flowing swing to emerge. We've got to recognise the movement we're going to make to allow the body to access that pattern. So it's a simulation. That's what we're creating through practice. We're exploring, we're creating recognisable patterns, and this essentially becomes a simulation that we just re-access time and time and time again, but with elaboration. There's plasticity to the system and therefore fluidity. This thing adapts, but at the heart of it is a release pattern that we recognise in response to the golf shot we've visualised. So the intention creates the movement. So the release pattern, how do we recognise that? How do we recognise the timing of it? How does this affect things like low point of the golf swing? Well, first of all, we're going to use the board in the horizontal position. And essentially, we're going to rock the board to get that shift of pressure and that weight shift essentially. And I want you to use your lead hand so my left hand in this case, and we're going to swing the club back halfway, 3/4, okay, and we're going to use the trail hand. I'm going to cock the wrist and use this to push the club, so I can develop a sense of when and where I'm applying a force to this club to deliver it to the golf ball with a pattern that I recognise for the golf shot. For example, if we're playing a high shot, maybe a driver as well, maybe we want to launch the ball high, we may push the club in this direction, so the arc of the swing widens very, very quickly, and so the club releases earlier. I've not yet shifted, so my pressure's still on the right side. It's moving, and this is what the rails allow. The rails allow the ball to tip without the left side touching the ground just yet, because the club is starting to release. And then I can sense the shifting of the pressure and the timing of the release. So we can use this exercise to sense spatially and temporally where that release is happening, but also there's a kinesthetic feedback loop here in respect to the forces generated and the way the body is reacting through the instability of the GRF board. So the rails are allowing me to rock without tipping and touching the ground just yet, but I'm moving towards that place. I'm letting the pressure move, but it's not quite hit the ground yet. This is what we're going to sense. We're going to sense that interaction with the rails and the ground. So when we fire the golf club, when we release that club, the shifting of the board is preceding this motion. The forces are preceding the motion, i.e. the release, but we're developing a recognition of when that release is happening and what type of release we're creating in response to the shot we intend. What would the trajectory be like? What would the launch angle be like? If we were hitting a low golf shot, so like an iron, maybe we're shifting much earlier, tipping the board much earlier, and pushing the club later. And that form of movement would represent a lower golf shot. This kind of finish is typical of a lower trajectory in comparison to a higher launch. So the board still tips to initiate the movement, but there is a difference in the timing, and you will sense this. And there's a difference in the timing of when I apply the force to the club and the direction of the force that I'm applying. For a higher launch, we may be pushing the club out. The release is earlier, loft is added, ball flies higher. Now we don't let the trail hand follow the club. We apply that force very sharply with intent and purpose, but not in the direction we're swinging, actually away from the direction we're going, because it's this outward force that's going to release the club. So a low trajectory, a high trajectory. So maybe with a driver, when we want a higher launch, we will be banging the board with intent to the left. This precedes the release. But the form of movement the upper body takes is quite different in response to the intended launch and trajectory. So we can start to recognise where this swing takes us. So now with both hands on the club, we can continue the swing. Remember to initiate with the board. And we can swing back and through to this same finishing position. And the higher shot, just to refresh our memory, the release is happening in a different place. The application of force is different. Recognise the finish and now swing back and through to that finish. So the timing and the style of the release is recognisably different. The finish represents the shot. The board is providing that feedback loop for the timing of that pressure shift. the momentum. And this will also influence the low point of the swing. For example, if we use this image of the golf swing, this is the club head travelling. It's not really a circle, more of an ellipse around the body, but it's a reasonable representation. When we swing back, essentially the low point of the golf swing is moving with us. And when we swing through, it moves back with us. So the low point shifts. How your body's organising itself in response to these forces and the intention of the shot is influencing the low point. And through the timing of the tipping of the board, we can recognise and influence where that low point might be. For example, if we don't return the board early enough and we stay back, the low point may stay back. We might hit the ground before the ball or catch the ball thin. Likewise, if we drive the swing with the upper body, potentially the low point moves too far forward. But I want you to explore this. Explore the movement of the body with the timing of the rocking of the board. And this is going to help to attune you to recognising and sensing that low point and getting that pure contact, getting that centre of percussion, the sweet spot of the club face on the ball, and ultimately getting the compression that gives us the feel of that perfect shot. All the exercises can also be performed with the pressure domes. And we've got two sizes of pressure dome. We've got the 0.5 centimetre, they're the shallower ones, and the 1 centimetre, slightly more raised, and that's the depth. If you're wearing trainers, I'm wearing trainers now, we're going to use the shallower dome. Otherwise it's going to raise the foot too high off the floor. But if you're going in bare feet or stocking feet, that's no problem. Use the 1 centimetre. And we're going to place the pressure domes on the discs. And we're going to use the outer discs. Now these are magnetic and will hold position to enable you to move. And we're using these discs to amplify our awareness of where the pressure is moving through the feet. So ultimately, it's creating a feedback loop for our foot movement and an awareness of where our pressure is moving through that footprint. So essentially, we are mapping the pressure that's creating the form of movement with the body. So we're starting to recognise from the ground up where this movement originates from and how. So we're going to start with the board in the horizontal direction with a shoulder width stance, and we're going to step onto the discs so that the discs are in the middle of the midfoot. So we've got the forefoot, the midfoot, and the rear foot. The rear foot is the heel. The midfoot is from the heel to the balls of the feet. And then we've got the forefoot, which is the balls to the toes. We're going to stand so the disc is directly in line with the centre of the midfoot. So if you take the arch of your foot and look for the centre of that and then follow in towards the centre of the foot, that's where we're going to place it. So that's where we place the foot. So essentially, it's underneath the curvature of the foot in the middle. And now, when we start to move the board, we can start to feel how our pressure is moving to create that movement, to rock the board, and how it's moving in relation to the dome. So you can feel the pressure move to the outside of the dome, the inside, forward and back. And I would just take a second just to familiarise yourself just with the domes and the feeling, the sensation you get of moving the pressure to the right, to the left, forward and back. And then we're going to take a club and just make some gentle half swings. And if we just move more side to side, you'll feel the weight move more laterally. Inside of the left dome as a right-hander, towards the outside of the right dome, and then vice versa, inside the right dome, towards the outside of the left. So the pressure is moving over the dome. Okay, it doesn't stay static, it's always moving, and that's something you'll recognise. Pressure's always moving, it's not static. Then we can start to swing the club, and we can start to rotate the body. As a right-hander, when I rotate back, where does that pressure move in relation to the dome? Well, I can feel the pressures move more towards the heel, so it's to the rear of the dome, and also towards the right-hand side of the dome. And then, as I start the downswing, it moves towards the inside of the dome, towards my midline of the body. But it's not moved forward yet. It's not moved around or over the dome towards the balls of the feet. It's just moving towards, if you like, the midline of the body. And then, as I start to extend, I can feel the pressure moving around the dome and off the ball of the foot towards the big toe. It's actually moving towards the big toe and the second toe. But we can feel that pressure moving around the dome, outside, inside, and off the toe. It's not moving straight over the dome. It's not to the right of the dome, in the middle of the foot. It's more towards the rear of the dome. And then where does it go in the left foot? Now I can feel the pressures moved towards the outside of the dome and towards the rear. So if we're thinking of a north, south, east, west compass, okay, and the backswing, the pressure might be moving more southeast to southwest towards north. In the left foot, the lead foot, it's moving probably more northeast towards west to southwest, and maybe with full extension, full rotation, almost south. Okay, really deep in the heel. But what we know is that the pressure's moving. That's all we need to recognize at the moment. How is your pressure moving? When you swing, does it go north? Does it go to the front of the domes? Okay, if we're rocking the board and we're feeling pressure on the forefoot, on both feet, maybe that could be restricting our rotation, because we know if we want to rotate, the pressure's going to have to move to allow that to happen. If we want to rotate the ankle, pressure has to move to rotate the ankle. For example, if we want to explore our rotation, simply look behind you. So imagine your friend's calling you from behind, and just turn very quickly and let your eyes lead the action. And then return just with the head. So return just with the head, and now where do you feel that pressure in the feet? Okay? There is no set position. We are all very different, but where do you recognize your pressure needs to be to make this body rotation throughout the whole system? Where do you recognize it? The domes are giving us a form of reference. So now we can recognize how we've moved, and we're creating a map. So where does my pressure need to move to rotate the full body? And then simply turn back. So simply look down to where the ball would be. Let the body tilt. And we're starting to get a sense of where pressure needs to be to make this movement. Now when we swing, we can simply go straight to that place. So we're starting to feel a natural rotation, and we can now recognize it. It's pattern recognition, movement recognition, and we're doing it from the ground up. So we can feel where the pressure's moving to facilitate this whole functional pattern. So we can swing through, and we can sense where the pressure moved in order to rock the board and create this movement to the finish. Now we can speed the tempo up to start to get a sense of how we use momentum in the swing. So to do that, we can sense how the pressure, ultimately the force, precedes the motion. And it's the intention that precedes the force. So if we use our trail hand on the lead side, my left leg, we can rock the board first and use that motion to swing the club. So we can start to get a sense of how our feet are interacting with the ground to rock the board, ultimately, and create the momentum to swing the club head to the top of the backswing. And let the body rotate, just as we were when we were looking behind. We can even look behind as we do it. Be careful with this one. And get a sense of how the pressure's moving in relation to the domes on both feet. Maybe think about the right foot first, and then make another swing and think about the left. And now both. And just recognise, be aware of where that pressure shifted in relation to the dome. North, south, east, west. Where is it in relation to the disc? And now we can use the same sequence, i.e. move the board first to initiate the downswing. That creates the momentum to swing the club. And we can rock back first with the board to swing back, and we can rock through first with the board to swing through. And the snap of the club comes after the rocking of the board. So we can sense how our feet are using the board to create the momentum in the swing. And we can essentially feel how our feet are pushing. We can feel it against the domes, and we can feel how the pressure moves around the domes, and that is ultimately attuning us to our horizontal, rotational, and vertical forces. So now we're going to use the pressure dome, but we're going to use it unilaterally. So we're going to use it on one leg at a time. So we're not going to have both feet on the board. But to show you what we're going to be doing, I just want to explain first what the purpose of the exercises are. So you can see here where the force is directed in the downswing to accelerate the club from transition into delivery. It's moving forward and up. Okay, it's also moving to the left slightly towards the target. Before impact, we can see the force has changed direction, and the left leg, the lead leg, increases in force, and it moves back through the hip towards the body, back towards the centre of mass. It's a braking force. So we're going to use now the pressure dome to feel where the pressure moves in the feet to create these force vectors. And we're going to recognise these as the horizontal, the rotational, and the vertical forces. So we're going to use a rotation disc. We're going to use the board with the pressure dome in the centre. So you'll just attach it to the magnet in the centre. And we're also going to use the directional guide. And we're going to place that on the end plate. So now we've got a form of reference for where the pressure's moving, and we can feel how that pressure's moving because we've got a reference point in the centre of the foot. So we can sense where the pressure's migrating towards to create the forces, and we can feel the magnitude of those forces with our interaction with the board, the rocking of the board, and we can sense the timing of it too. Now, this is very much heavily reliant on ankle and hip mobility, and we're going to explore these mobilities by using the rotational disc, because the rotational disc is going to isolate hip mobility. And when we go back to the ground without the rotational disc, now we're introducing the foot and the ankle, and so the ankle mobility and the hip mobility are now working together, and stability too. The ankle joint and the hip joint are working together to rotate the leg, the hip, the pelvis. So we're going to start with the rear foot. We're going to feel rear foot propulsion. So we place the board. For myself, trail foot, that's my right foot. We're going to place that to the right. Rotational disc to the left. Shoulder width stance. What I suggest you do first without a club is get used to this configuration and get used to using them. We want to feel safe. The pressure dome will be underneath the centre of the foot. We've now got the red line on the directional guide straight ahead. That's pointing in line with the big toe and the second toe. That runs through the midfoot. The yellow line points to the left, silver line to the right. We can then step on to the rotational disc, rotate the disc just to get a feel and get comfortable, and bang the board back and forth to rotate the disc. This essentially is how we're going to move to rotate the disc. We're going to bang the board from heel to toe to rotate the disc. As you rotate and bang the board towards the heel, you're probably going to feel the pressure move more south-east. And then as you start to move to use the board to twist the disc, you're probably going to feel your pressure moving more inside, more southwest, of the disc, ready to bang the board to get that speed when rotating the disc. So to get the power to rotate the disc, which essentially is the left hip, we're using the right leg and the right hip to rotate the left hip. And in a golf swing, we typically see this. And this is termed internal rotation. What we're actually doing here is we're externally rotating. That means this angle here between the pelvis and the femur is increasing. And this is the power move. And this is what's going to set you up for that propulsion and vertical force and transfer of energy through the system to the club head. Because the pelvis elevates. We don't stay down in flexion. We let ourselves extend. But we're doing it at the right time. We've already created the movements to precede this action here. We're creating a form of movement utilizing our natural alignments, natural anatomical function, bang, to create the rotation and the vertical. And we've already used our horizontal to move into this place. We're starting to harmonize and blend these three forces together purely by moving from heel to toe. But remember, it's not really heel to toe. You know now, using that frame of reference with the dome, how that pressure migrates around the dome. Southeast, southwest, up towards the ball of the foot, through the red line. So you may even feel your pressure move inside, towards the yellow line. That's fine. But we want it to move towards the red. If you're a golfer who tends to slide and go into internal rotation, we want to feel the pressure move more towards the silver line. So we're going to bang the board in the direction of the silver line. And now we're starting to create even more external rotation. A la Dustin Johnson, a la Justin Thomas, a la Hao Tong Lee. Anybody else you care to mention who hits it a long way? This is the Luke Donalds. This is the guys who don't get that much rotation and therefore explosive kinematic chain. So if we're struggling with distance, maybe we're translating our mass too much, i.e. shifting and not using enough of the rotational component. And this is how you access it. And you can feel the magnitude of the force by the intensity of the banging of the board, the pressure you're applying and the noise, the banging. If you're using a firm surface, you can hear the banging of the board. And that rotates the discs. Use the bang of the board to rotate the disc. Now let's introduce a club. Starting on the toe or the ball of the foot, so the board's rocked forward. My heel's not off the floor though to do that. All I've done is just tip the board forward. We're going to bang the board to swing back. This leg's going to rotate naturally. Okay, now comes the magic move. Now we're starting to feel where the pressure is in this phase of the swing. And as we start to swing down, we can feel where we're starting to move in preparation for the propulsion. Bang. And look how early this has happened. Ready to let the club release. So the propulsion precedes the impact snap, i.e. the release. This is already delivering the club to the ball, and this is accelerating it. This tends to happen early to mid downswing, and with your driver, even earlier. We're going to use this force much earlier with the driver to accelerate the club earlier in the downswing. So this action will feel earlier. And with an iron, maybe later, maybe more in mid downswing, but definitely not late downswing. So we're using this action to accelerate the club into delivery and release through impact. So we've got a free-flowing release. We can use the left arm swing as a right-hander. So use the lead hand, swing back, Feel where the pressure is. Now use this action to swing the arm off the body. Pressure dome is giving a vital reference point for you to sense how the pressure is moving through the foot. And now you've got the directional guide to have a play around with. What's it like when you press in the yellow direction? What's it like to press in the silver direction? And what about in the red? This pressure moves very quickly. And that's rotating the hips and therefore the pelvis, and the speed can transfer through the system to the golf club. So now we can go back to using the club with both hands, just a nice easy half swing, and keep the swing dynamic. Let's not stop. Let's feel motion and the fluidity of the motion and get a sense of what the body's doing whilst in motion. So we're shifting our attention mindfully onto the golf swing whilst in motion, and we can shift our attention into different parts of the body whilst swinging the club back and through. So I can think about the feet first and the pressure, maybe the right foot. Isolate the right foot first. And now feel maybe how that's rotating the left leg, the left hip. And now the right hip. What does the right hip do when we move back? How does that right hip respond to that pressure trace moving back? And when we change direction, where does the pressure move in relation to the dome? And where does it very quickly shift to bang the board and create the forces for that acceleration of the club? And this is the propulsion mechanism we're using with the right side of the body. Now, the real reason we're using this is to go back to the ground. Now we're going to sense that foot-ground interaction without the training system. And this is the whole purpose of the drill. Now you can really start to sense how the feet are being used to create those forces. And what we've just done, naturally, is recruit those force vectors to rotate and elevate the body and transfer that speed through to the club. And you're sensing the whole system from the ground. So now we're going to move to the same exercise with the board underneath the trail foot, but now the pressure pad underneath the lead foot. So for me, that's right foot on the board with the pressure dome underneath the middle of the foot, using the directional pressure guide too. Left foot on the balance pad, just move around just to get comfortable. Remember, the pressure pad is inflated to about 60%, so it's providing mobility, but also stability too. If it's too inflated, it might slip off it. It can be quite unstable. So we want that instability, but we also want it to be stable so we can move and be more aggressive with the move without slipping off the pad. So now with the pressure pad, we've got that feeling of the air in the pad that we're using, that compression, which is representing that vertical force. And we can also sense the movement that is created from these forces. So ultimately, the forces that are being created are recognizable to us as a movement pattern. And now we've got a sense for the force being applied as well. The disc gave us the feeling of the rotation. This is allowing that movement to happen, but now we're sensing the vertical force with it, and horizontal too. So the disc was purely rotation, and now we're introducing horizontal and vertical. And they're being produced as a couple with the right foot. So the left foot's reacting to the right foot's reacting to the left foot. It's very important that we recognise the role that each foot is playing. And we've got the pressure disc heightening that sensation of how the pressure's moving through the right foot. We've got the directional guide to give us a sense of where we're pushing that weight, in what direction, yellow, red, or silver, and how that's influencing essentially the hip movement and the left leg movement. So as we rotate and extend through the propulsion of the right leg. And now this is affording me the opportunity to extend. By pushing down into the pad, we can extend. And this is creating that braking force. So we've got the generation of the forces which are shifting the body, rotating the body, and elevating the body, and transferring that speed through the system to the club. So we can do this exercise with just the left arm on the club, or the lead arm, and get a sense of how that elevation really helps transfer that angular momentum, essentially what we recognise as speed, to the club head. So there's an elevation. So we need to push, to rotate and elevate. And now with the trail hand. So there's a flexion, extension, flexion, extension of the body to facilitate the use of these three forces. And then we can go to both hands. And just get a sense of where this swing takes you to. It's probably going to be a different finish because the movement we're creating is different, because the forces are different. So recognise where this swing takes us to, because this is important. This is the destination of the swing that we need to recognise so the body accepts this form of movement and the journey we're going to take. It knows where it's going. The nervous system is accepting this movement, and therefore it's going to enable us to revisit it and explore further and essentially find that natural, optimal pattern. So there are variations, and I want you to explore. We can switch these around. So we can now move the board underneath the lead foot, pressure pad underneath the trail, left foot for me, with the pressure dome underneath the centre of the foot. So that's bisecting the great toe and the second toe. So we've got the red line down the midline of the foot. And now, in order for me to rotate, which we can do by simply just looking behind us to explore that movement. So remember, eyes go first, action follows vision. Eyes go first. Look for your mate behind you. Maintain this position and just turn the head back and get a sense of how your foot reacted on the balance pad. Where did the pressure move over the dome? Where are you pushing in order to go into this place? Notice the elevation of the right hip, this hike of the pelvis, this rotation of the torso. Did we stay in flexion or did we extend slightly? We're still in flexion, we're not extended. We're kind of extending more towards neutral. Some people might stay in flexion more. Some people might extend a lot. There's no right or wrong. Just turn around, your body's going to give you the answer. Just turn around at speed to my trail side. Now, if I want to look down at the ball, I need to side bend. I need to tilt and have a look down. Where did my pressure go when I tilted? I'm feeling my hip hike, pressure move further to the right and deeper towards the heel. Maybe explore that with the club in the hands. Look behind, look down, and have a look down for the ball. Now bring the club back, and off we go. The lead foot is pushing the board forward, and you'll sense this, to enable the pelvis to rotate. And in what direction are you pushing? So the directional guide comes into play. Maybe you're pushing in the yellow direction. Maybe you might feel the silver direction, but where do you feel, or maybe the red, maybe through the midline. Where do you feel that optimal place to rotate the pelvis with ease? And where does the pressure move through the foot in relation to the dome? At a dress, you might feel the pressure evenly distributed between the balls of the feet and the heel on the tripod. So the pressure's on the dome, evenly spread. And then as we start to rotate, I would start with the board tipped towards the heel, so then you can tip it forward and rotate the pelvis. So we've got a tipping action, creating the rotation, and the ease of movement to swing the club. And then we can use two hands and explore that rotation of the body. When I say rotation, there's shifting, there's horizontal, there's extension, there's vertical to allow us to rotate. We can swing through with this exercise too. Because we're going to rock the board back to create that force for the downswing. And that precedes the motion. Remember the intention. The intention precedes the force precedes the motion. What's the intention? It's to bang the board and recognize the pressure shift. You can feel the pressure shift and then let it go. So the sound of the swish came after the banging of the board. So now we're recognizing the movements we're making. We can feel the propulsion of the right side, the trail side. We can feel how the lead side reacts, both in the backswing and the through swing. And we're getting a sense of timing of when we apply these forces and when we sense them transfer to the club, which is auditory. We can hear the swish and we can feel the snap. And that's how you can start to recognize the timing of your swing through the timing of the forces.